Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Clear Your Path podcast. My name is Daniel Tchaikovsky, and today I am joined by my wonderful friend and guest, Dean Colson. Dean, say hello to the audience.
Hey guys, how are you doing? Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Yeah, no worries. We on this podcast talk all about letting go, and Dean is an expert in this, and he's going to share us. You're going to share your stories around letting go, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So just tell the audience a little bit about what you do, you know, day to day, and how you help people.
Yeah, okay. So my main focus is helping high achieving men transmute stress and anxiety in their lives, just by uncovering and removing what I call emotional landmines, those things that we move away from. Men are especially good at avoiding. And emotional landmines keep them stuck. So I want to be able to help them uncover and let go of these trapped emotions, so they can relax more, they can feel happy within themselves, they feel more fulfilled, and just spend time more, doing the important things in life instead of just getting caught up in the rat race, really.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people caught up in the rat race, aren't they? And
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah, and they're
absolutely.
not really leading a life of purpose.
No, they're not. For me, I see it's a lack of leadership in themselves. So we always
Yeah,
start leadership always starts with themselves and how they conduct themselves, whether they honor their body, honor their mind. But I see people so, like, especially men, so caught up in their fears and wear a brave face, to have that bravado, and it just stops them from fully expressing who they are and really, stopping them from thriving in their lives.
yeah, and that's that's a really good point. But we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But I want to ask you the question that I'm going to ask all my guests, and that is, how has letting go impacted your life, Dean?
It's been massively powerful. Once I understood why I did the things I did and then beat myself up for doing them. Those things that you said you weren't going to do, or things you were going to do and you didn't do. Once I realized that it all hinged around emotional well-being and repressing my emotions, once I allowed myself and learned how
Mm,
to let go of these emotions by fully feeling them and feeling those uncomfortable sensations, once that happened, everything changed. My whole perspective on life changed and just totally shifted. Because then I knew I had the tools to be able to remove all this discomfort instead of moving away from it, from distract myself from it, from numbing it out.
yeah,
Whatever tools, the common things to do. I realized that if I was brave enough, if I had the courage just to sit in the discomfort, those really icky, horrible sensations that we try and move from. Once I did that, I felt massively empowered. I had more clarity, I had more energy around myself, because of course it takes energy to repress these things. So
yeah.
by letting them go, I took my energy back, and I'm a massively big believer in self-sovereignty, having ultimate power over yourself, and that allowed that to happen. And it's a daily process, as we know. It's something I work on daily, and the more I do it, the more free and liberating I feel.
Yeah, and my life is actually, we recently met, didn't we? But
Yeah,
we
yeah.
found out that how similar our lives are.
It's uncanny.
Yeah, it's just probably out of anyone I've ever met in my life, we have the most similarities.
Yeah, I would agree. Exactly the same for me. Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. We both had IT businesses. We worked in IT.
Yeah,
We both do this work, and we kind of stopped roughly at the same time doing the
yeah,
IT business.
that's right.
We both love art,
Yes. We
and
both being good at drawing from an early age.
yeah, and more recently, we both experienced being scammed of pretty much an identical amount of money, which was
Yeah,
that was the craziest freaky thing that happened, I think.
I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. Totally
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah, it's astounding. I'm interested to see what else we uncover in similar
Yeah,
scenarios.
yeah. It's and this is one of the benefits of like working together with someone, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, if I think if you're new into letting go, then if you can find someone who you can be truly open and honest with,
Yeah,
then you allow everything to come up, right?
that's right. If you find someone who you trust to keep, like, create space, safe space for to share, then yes, it's gold dust. Really, it is.
Yeah.
It's a really brilliant thing to have.
Yeah, and it's like I remember when we've recently sort of upped, when we've been working together, we kind of like upped our level of sort of complete vulnerability.
Yes, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's no
So I
holds
know
barred, like
things
I said.
about Dean that very few people know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
vice versa.
And the same with Daniel as well. But yeah, it's exactly that. I think that's massively powerful. And I think as a man, we don't like the idea of being vulnerable. Don't like that. But if we can flip that around and think, if you change it to having the courage to facing your fears, it's the same thing, but then it feels like it's, we can move towards something. But vulnerability, yeah, we know it's just having the courage to do something without any control of the outcome. And I think being a control freak that I am, and I've been working on this a lot over my life. For the longest time, I didn't realize that I was, but now working on letting him go of that control and trusting the process of life is massively powerful. You
Because
just got to have that courage.
the control always comes from fear, doesn't it? So it's always,
Yes,
we have this fear, and because we don't want to face the fear, we have a need to control, our people, situations, everybody, right?
that's right. Even the outcomes of things. If we have a goal, we want to know that it's going to work. Otherwise, we don't want to do the work. Instead of just focusing on the daily processes, whether it's clearing, whether it's feeling your emotions, whether it's going out for a walk, whatever the steps are towards being able to let go of the outcome of those processes and trust the process itself.
Yeah, exactly. And trust life in a way,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's what
absolutely.
happens when you let go, right?
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
trusting that life happens for you instead of to you. And I think trusting in that's the positive. Trusting that's going to happen for you, but happening to you is the fear that something bad might happen, and so then you try and control all the variables.
Yeah, 100%. So just, I know this story, but for our listeners, how did you get started on this journey?
This all happened about 20 years ago when my wife and I were trying to have kids. We were trying to have kids for 5 years, and we went to see medics, and they told us we couldn't. It was impossible to have kids naturally, which was devastating because we've been trying for a long time. At the time we wanted not a big family, but a couple of kids running around, and that was really hard thing to hear. But we just accepted it because we had no awareness of anything else. And so we thought, right, we'll go down the IVF route. And we tried that twice and it failed twice. But in between that, I started looking at what else is possible. What else can, I'm a big believer in there's always a way, even if the way is a challenge. And so I thought, okay, what else is possible? So I started reading nutrition books. We actually booked a nutritionist, looking through the yellow pages. That was the thing back then. There was no Google search. We managed to find one, and she blew our world apart in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Well, it was a huge awakening for me and for Joy, because we came back and all the things that we believed were healthy eating wise weren't. Like the
Give us an example.
skim milk, whole wheat bread, all these things. Didn't even understand the concept of processed food back then. I mean, even, like, saying that now, it sounds crazy that I didn't, but I remember I even remember the staple diet for me was brown buns with processed ham, processed cheese, and Branston pickle. That was what I loved to eat. And after that day, we went home that night. We opened all the cupboards; they were full, but there was nothing to eat. The shift was massive, because we wanted kids so much. And then we started changing that. As I said, we're reading books, we changed our nutrition. Very hard to get free from things back then, but we did find a health food shop which sold spelt bread, for example, which didn't have the same kind of gluten in, which has an effect with inflammation. As I said, that was between the first and second IVFs. It still didn't help the IVF. But then I found another book. It was Natural Solutions to Infertility by Dr. Marilyn Glenville. I remember it, read it cover to cover, it just spoke to me. So I rang the author. She had a team that helped. We got a consultation, we did hair mineral analysis, all that kind of thing. found deficiencies in me. I mean, the problem was mine, by the way. The whole sperm thing was mine. You know, there's 3 things with sperm. There's supposed to be, you know, millions of them. They're supposed to be all healthy. They're supposed to all swim. Well, I had about 5, not 5 million. None of them could swim, and they were
Thanks for the vulnerability.
Yeah, exactly. And that was it. But like jumping forwards, we did all the recommendations of this team that we had this consultation with. I got a tincture with different herbs in to promote, you know, male fertility. And 3 months after that, which is the maturation time of sperm, Joy was pregnant. It was that powerful.
Wow. And now you have 8 kids. Not really.
I now have a whole team. Actually, I don't. We have 1, and there's another reason for that. Because of course Joy became pregnant. Sam's 18 now. You know, he's a healthy lad. He's an adult, but he was conceived naturally, which was massively powerful. But of course, after that, Joy had a harrowing pregnancy where she had anxiety from being pregnant from something, you know, from something that happened in her past that sort of was buried, like we all do. We all push it down and bury it and don't face it. Sometimes it's because we're too young and we just do the best we can with, you know, where we are and what we know. But it triggered an anxiety condition. We thought it was morning sickness at first because it presented itself as like extreme nausea. But over time, when the anti-nausea drugs weren't even touching the sides, that's when we knew it was something else. And she had a horrible time. It was a horrible time. So it was very bittersweet. It was something that would work for so long. We found a way to make it happen. And then it was just not a nice thing. And that's when I started looking at trauma. That was the first instance into trauma. I was looking at trauma and traumatic experiences. I was just trying to understand so I could help her. Yeah.
It's funny because you mentioned that journey and I said how our lives are very, very similar. I pretty much had the same kind of experience. You know, I looked at nutrition many years ago, and before it was trendy. Now it's you know
mainstream now.
Now it's mainstream. Everyone knows this. You know, doctors know this, and and then I started looking into trauma. For my own, you know, my own stuff, my past. And I came across a guy called Lester Levinson, who was given, I think, a month or 2 months to live.
Wow.
And he set about asking the fundamental questions, and he discovered this process where he felt tension in his body and he released it, and he felt much lighter about certain people, certain situations, and he did this 24 hours a day.
Wow.
He said it took him 3 months, and he had healed all his illnesses, and he had attained a really high state, a really high vibrational state.
Wow.
But he had healed everything. So it's incredibly powerful stuff, isn't it?
Once you understand it, and you know, I think it's a tool that can help anything. It can heal you for sure. You know, it can, as you said, it can take your vibration higher. You know, you can get rid of those common sensations that most people feel: guilt, shame, rejection. Those are the 3 common things. You know, the fear of being judged and criticized, which is, you know, what humans fear above death, because it's immediate, whereas death's something in the future. So it's just something that we deal with, and it's so painful. And of course, you know, our brain always moves us away from pain. What we never consider is physical pain is something that we, you know, if you put your hand in a fire or you fall off a bike or whatever it is, we understand that we don't want to do that again. But what we don't seem to understand or have an awareness of is emotional pain is the same thing. You know, so any kind of emotional pain we have, our body will move away. It'll create a story. It'll create a narrative. So the next time that happens, you'll immediately go and do that thing as opposed to feel it because it's not nice.
And we run away from our feelings all the time, and you know, we'll use so many different things to run away from our feelings, including, you know, obviously alcohol, sex, drugs, overworking,
gambling,
over-exercising,
emotional eating, all those things.
Eating, that's a good one.
And I think
other people as well.
That,
you know, that means we avoid the internal feelings that come up.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, and I think they're the big hitters. They're always the great ones, great indicators. But then, of course, once those are aware of, and maybe you do something about them, it's the subtle things that we don't pick up.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that get us. And that's where we get to trust our intuition. But how many people do? You know, I still get caught up with that at times. That's how I was scammed because I wasn't listening to my intuition.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's always something that there's a fear locked in place that stops us from listening to our intuition, or something along the lines of losing something, or and that prevents us from listening to the signals, the what the source is saying within us, what our heart knows.
Yeah, I agree. I think we get stuck in our heads, our ego. I think our ego, it's not a good or bad thing. It's what we've programmed to keep us safe. And so whatever stories or beliefs that uses, it'll always get you to focus on them away from the sensations of the body.
Yeah. Did you apply, because you used to work in IT, right? So did you apply this? Did you know about it? Yeah, you did know about it when you were working in IT. Did you manage to apply it within your working sphere?
I wasn't so aware of the emotional side then. It was more nutrition because of the pregnancy. It was about mindset stuff. And obviously I was always a physical guy, martial artist, and always trained. So I had those elements down. But what I could never understand was, in times of being stressed, that you kept reverting back to the things that you said you didn't want to do, which is then what led me on to change my IT. I created a fitness business, and I was helping people with these things, and I was just seeing it more and more. And it was triggering me as well. It was triggering emotions in me, which I didn't understand at the time. And my confidence was going down. I was thinking, well, I can help all these people, but why aren't they not doing it? Why aren't they doing the things I'm helping them, trying to help them with? And that's when I went to neuroscience. That was my first step to understanding the brain and, what we do when, in times of stress or threat or feeling unsafe, that fight or flight response, that stress response, and how it downregulates the thinking logical brain, and we go and react and do what we did the last time that kept us safe. And then that led me on to trying to understand fear more and what fear was. And I understood the concept of sitting with emotions and sitting with fear. Sorry, it was like at a broad, fear is that kind of broad sort of narrative where, sitting with your fears. But I didn't truly understand the emotional healing and sitting with emotions and, fully feeling sensations until relatively, it was about 5 years ago. That was when I really started understood. Okay, now I get.
Yeah. It's like you can read about it, but until you do it, until you experience it, you really don't understand.
No, I totally, I've got the concept of it, but I didn't understand how to do it, or probably most likely my brain was preventing me from looking at it because it was unsafe to do. That's what happens. That's why a lot of people struggle with this. Even I've worked with people who struggle with it because their fears, their emotional, or what I call emotional splinters, those things that have been left and not dealt with wherever it was in their lives, sometimes it's that painful that they just don't have the awareness. They're just not ready to be able to sit with that intense discomfort.
So how would you help someone to gain more awareness into what is actually going on? So for example, if you're with someone and you notice within them that they're suppressing a feeling, or whatever emotion it is, how do you help bring them to a state of awareness of that suppressed feeling?
I think the first thing we've got to be aware of that's important is that to ask the question whether they want my help. Because I've always, because you've got the tools, sometimes you can help them, but they're not ready. So it's first checking in with that. And then really the awareness can come just from a challenge of what they're saying. Is that true? And of course they'll say yes. And this comes from Byron Katie's work, loving what is, challenging those beliefs. Where's the evidence? Who would you be without that? And I think that's a massively important question, because we create an identity around these fears, around these beliefs. And who would we be without that? Sometimes that is scary. Sometimes that feels unsafe. So then we'll go and defend those beliefs. And that's when you know whether people are ready or not. My mom's a classic example. You know, my mom's very unhealthy, and she will talk about how unwell she feels and all that stuff, but she's not interested in being well because she gets safety from people giving her sympathy, giving her empathy. And that's not a judgment, that's just an observation. So
Yeah.
as much as I want to help my mom in her healthiness, because she doesn't eat very well, she vapes, she used to smoke, she moved on to vaping, the new modern thing. She drinks, which she never used to drink, and she's in her late 70s. But she'll not feel, you know, she's always struggled with depression and anxiety since I was a teen, and this was the first instance I had with this, how, you know, the first exposure of it. But she's not ready, otherwise she would do something about it.
And sometimes the older generation, it's harder for them to approach this kind of methodology or kind of new way of doing things.
Yeah.
Or to face whatever emotions they have inside of them. It feels, for me, the younger generation is definitely more open to it.
I would agree with that. I mean, the older generation, they're quite indoctrinated with the medical profession. You know, they have their place, of course. Medicine has that place, but it's not everything. It's just one thing. But I know because of the way, especially the way it's structured in the UK with the NHS, where, you know, it's free healthcare, I'll put that in quotes, but, you know, we're able to go and see a doctor, be able to go to a hospital. You don't have to worry about insurance and all that kind of thing. So it's easy just to go there. And a lot of people have been indoctrinated that they just want that quick fix, that magic pill. They just want something just to put in their mouth and just to make it all go away. But they never, of course, we know that that doesn't work because it's still inside us. We still have to deal with that stuff. But again, it's another way of masking, you know, what's really going on.
Yeah, and sometimes for the individual, that's necessary to mask it because they're not yet ready to face it.
Yes,
so
that's true. Yeah.
Put it into their unconscious awareness so they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then eventually it may come a time where, you know, something appears or pops up or a health condition appears and they're forced to face it one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, anything that presents itself as symptomatic of something deeper, whether that's emotional stuff, which can present physically, as we know, or actual physical stuff, you know, some kind of physical pain, or some other health related issue, you know, some disease, whether it's some kind of metabolic condition or autoimmune condition. Those things start at a cellular level. But we only really notice them if we're not in tune out with our bodies until they present symptoms, by which time it's gone from a cellular level to a tissue level to an organ level to a system level, and then like an organism level. So that's, you know, by which time it's proliferated quite far down. But having this kind of awareness, you know, whether it's the physical side or the emotional side, we can then start looking at, you know, the cause, because prevention is always better than any cure, because the cure, is there really a cure if we're not really dealing with the base issue?
No, 100%. I think you have to deal with a layer which is deep enough so you make significant changes. Ideally, you want to deal with a root layer of any work that you do, whether it's, you know, emotional, physical, it's all at the root layer. And often that begins with the mind, doesn't it? It's the stories, it's the patterns that we've told ourselves over and over again about who we are, what we are, and the way the world works, the way people are. And if we hold on emotion for long enough, that starts to affect our physical body.
Absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, because if we think about emotions as energy in motion, and if we think of blocked emotions, suppress things that we're not dealing with, the energy has to move somewhere. So it will present itself somewhere else. It's just a way of getting you to listen. It's like, you know, you're not listening, so, you know, something else happens, then physical pain happens, whether it's, you know, fibromyalgia or headaches or just some kind of joint pain or something like that. It will be remind you, but if you're not aware of that, you'll just go and think, I'll pop a pill, I'll take an ibuprofen, I'll take paracetamol or whatever.
So from a personal perspective, have you healed any physical ailments through the letting go process, through emotional work? Or do you know other people that have?
I have done it personally, and I do know other people. So I know other people who've healed things like fibromyalgia, for example, because it's obviously it's pain, but it's coming from the brain. Because unless there's been some kind of physical trauma which
Yeah.
causes that pain, it's coming from within, and that's usually from repressing emotions or not dealing with things that are been there for a long time. Myself, used to have all kinds of health issues. Lactose intolerance was one thing with milk. Yes, I could remove that, but it had left a legacy, I suppose you could say. So being able to sit with what was being presented, brain fog, for example, was one. Just sitting with that instead of reacting. I've had, I'm not going to say heart problems. I've had like an aching heart in my past. Not just thinking, Christ, what's going on? But really, it was just my body trying to tell me something. And by now bringing awareness to any kind of aches, any kinds of pains, any kinds of sensations, and just accepting, just allowing myself just to be with them, they do dissipate, they do go away. As I said, it's just,
Sometimes it takes time. I mean, both you and I know
yeah,
that it's, sitting with your feelings, isn't always easy. In fact, it's hardly ever easy.
I'd say,
Um,
I would say it's the hardest thing you'll ever do is
yeah.
go within, because that's essentially what we do. We're not going without, we're not going externally to find the answers, which is what we're used to doing. It's by turning inwards and sitting with this stuff. Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress for sure.
Yeah. I would share that statement as well. As the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life.
Yeah,
Because everything you do revolves around your feelings. And
absolutely
everything
does.
you don't do, it's all feeling based, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're emotional beings. That's what makes us human.
Yeah.
And by being able to have that courage to go inside, that courage to sit with these things, and yeah, they can feel really shit. I'll be honest. Let's be,
Yeah.
totally to the point there. They can feel horrible. They can feel that intensity that you just want to run away, that you just want to mask and numb and sedate. But if you don't do that, if you have that courage to sit, and it doesn't have to go, you don't have to go down with the biggest, most hurtful things that you're feeling with, build that up, work with different things. Just first thing is always just having awareness of what's there. But if you're able to sit with them over time and you say, allow them to let go, to be able to be resolved, cleared, very liberating,
Mm.
absolutely amazing, really.
Yeah, I've got so many stories from my personal life where I have been able to liberate certain feelings, and then all of a sudden you feel lighter, you feel that you have more energy, maybe
Yeah.
an ache of pain has dissolved. It's amazing. It's like this kind of work should be taught everywhere,
Yes. It's
in
fundamental.
all schools,
Yeah.
um, even at work. You know,
Yeah.
it's just so powerful. But people don't really know, like you said earlier, until you've done it, until you've
Yeah.
experienced it, you don't really know.
No, you don't know. And I think if we have an understanding of a lot of our belief systems are created from um, overwhelming emotional experiences that we haven't processed, we haven't dealt with in our past. And there's no fault there, because usually it happens when we're very young, when we're more impressionable, and we just, whether we're exposed to an overwhelming experience at some point and we haven't dealt with it, we just get on with life and we just gets parked. But there's an energy block there. There's one of those what I call emotional splinters there. If you get a splinter in your finger and you don't remove it, so it's really painful at first, but over time, even if you haven't removed it, it's kind of the pain fades until you hit that exact spot, and it reminds you
Mm.
that it's still there. And that's why I think emotional splinters are the same. There's an emotion that's happened, it's raw, but you move on from it because you don't know how to deal with it in the moment, but it's still there. And then there'll be some kind of thing that triggers it, some reminder. Someone might say something, or you might see something, and then it reminds you of it again. And that's that energy block. And what happens is we then create a belief system around that to take us away from that pain. As I said earlier, we always move away from pain. And so that skews our worldview, because we start creating these belief systems which take us away from that. So there's so many, I worked with somebody years ago. In fact, I wasn't working with somebody years ago. Someone said that they hated exercise, for example. And it wasn't that they hated exercise, they just had a really bad experience at school with a horrible PT teacher, but PE teacher. But as a result of that, not only were they not exercising anymore because it, internally they'd labeled it as painful. It wasn't a safe experience. That then passed that on to their kids. So the kids didn't exercise either because they didn't like exercise.
Yeah, and
these
traumas can last not only years but generations.
Generations, yeah, it's generational. It is, yeah.
So I mean, for me, one of the and they can be spread across cultures as well. So for me, we're British, and one of the things about being British and English is always keep a stiff upper lip.
Yeah,
which is basically masking out what you're truly feeling.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a huge kind of trauma that the entire anyone who's in England, at some level carries, and people who perhaps are new to this country, they won't carry that.
Yeah, that's right.
But if you lived all your life in England, you'll carry that because you'll see it everywhere. You'll
Yeah, it's that cultural bias, and it's like what you call like societal mores, where you're moored to a certain way society works, which of course is the British stiff upper lip, and then to deviate from that is it's not something that you do. It's just, you don't feel safe, and at the end of the day, it's always about whether your nervous system, your body feels safe in that moment. And of course, these generational cultural biases have a massive impact because we just pass it on, and it just becomes part of us, which is why men, for example, have hold deep shame in being vulnerable and showing emotions and asking for help. It's like it's almost indoctrinated at birth as a man. You don't cry, you don't do this. I was like that for years. I was like that.
Yeah. That's a whole nother level. That's half of humanity, basically holding on to shame.
Yes.
Holding on to that feeling of not being strong if I cry, and it's and obviously women carry their own pain.
Yes, they do.
And often we blame the other sex for the pain that we experience, or trauma, and then therefore we can't release that, can we?
No, that's it, because we internalize it. It just makes it more painful and more painful, and the more intense the pain, the more we want to move away from it.
Yeah. So how do you, when you start your sessions, I know we've spoken several times together, so when you come on a call with a client, how do you typically begin a session, or
so I've got a framework for this, and it's all about just seeing where they are in the moment. So I call it Trinity coherence. It's not it's something I was taught. I didn't create that, but it's really about looking at the thoughts that we have. So I always start with, okay, what's going on with you today or this week, or this past week, or however long it is since we last spoke, and we're just getting an idea of where the discomfort's been, where they haven't had a good experience, whatever that experience is. So that's the awareness level, that's the mental level. And then from there, it's okay, so what kind of emotions were those thoughts bringing up? And okay, it might be anger, it might be frustration, it might be anxiety, because we're obviously looking at the ones that are preventing people from moving forwards, because there's nothing wrong with having the opposite of that, but we're looking at what's making them feel a certain way. And so we'll see, okay, let's see where we can accept these thoughts, and from there then I look to the physical level. So this is where the three parts, the mental, the awareness, the emotional, the acceptance of what's happening there, and then it comes down to the physical level. Where in the body, what sensations are those emotions bringing up in the body? And then I get people to sit with those sensations, and it can be uncomfortable. I'll create a safe environment first. I always get them to be in a safe environment. I don't just jump into that, because sometimes it can be too intense and they'll back off. So it's just about creating that safe environment, just seeing where the thoughts are, what emotions are coming up, being able to sit with these sensations in the body. It doesn't matter how long they take, and they're the splinters. They're the things that your body's showing is the reactionary part of
And
it.
everyone carries different splinters in different places, don't they?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And they can represent anything in the body. It could be in the body. It could be an ache. It could be a tension. Could be a pain. Areas of the body represent different things. For example, the stomach, or like the stomach area, or the solar plexus, is usually around shame.
Mm-hmm.
The chest space, the heart space. If you've got a sensation there, could be your heart aching, or it could be heavy. That's usually tied to rejection, for example. Your throat not feeling heard, or not saying
Communication.
things.
Yeah.
Communication, that can, or the throat can represent guilt as well. So there's different things represent different things, like aches in your eyes, not feeling seen at some point in your life.
Yeah.
There's lots of different metaphysical concepts to it, but it could be anything. It could just be that overall tension in the body. You feel like you're tense, or you have, one of my clients this week, he had itchy skin, and it's just having awareness that that's not normal. That's something that your body's presenting at that moment, and just being able to scan your body just to see what's going on, and then you've got something that you can sit with to let go of.
Yeah, I have a really interesting story. I remember I was in Madagascar
Yeah.
a few years back, and when I got there, I was just constantly getting bitten by mosquitoes,
Okay.
and it was really frustrating. And so I decided to like just sit with the irritation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I realized at some level, I think for me, it represented irritation, anger, suppressed anger. So
Right.
I would sit with the irritation if a mosquito was biting me. And I remember just I'd sit with it, and it was quite unpleasant.
I bet.
But then after about, I think, a week, 2 weeks of doing this,
Yeah.
the mosquitoes stopped biting.
Really?
Yeah. It was really
Wow.
weird. It was like, and I didn't clock on at first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at some metaphysical level, you could say that the mosquito was coming to help me clear my anger,
Yeah.
my suppressed anger,
Yeah.
through drawing out irritation.
Yeah. How
Um,
powerful is that?
yeah, that's yeah, it's and I know not many people, there's probably a very few people that would actually think, really? No, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But if you just sit with it and you clear it and see what happens. And this is the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the
Sit
shift.
with whatever comes up
Yeah.
and clear it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't know what's going to represent, with my clients, for example, I always get them to review the week and look back. What have you noticed that's different? Because we don't usually do that. We don't, if we have a shift like that, because that's what we usually call them. It's a shift. Something's changed as a result of being able to sit with these sensations. Something will have changed in your life going forward, something, and you might not be aware of it. Like you weren't, you didn't clock on with the mosquitoes straight away. But if you just reflect back, you can see how maybe you're looking at things in a different perspective because your belief system has changed. Or it might
Yeah.
just be that you just, you feel more energy, like we said before, or you have more clarity, you have less brain fog, or, you're not reacting to certain situations like you were before. There's always indicators.
Yeah. Or people are reacting differently to you.
Yes, yeah, because at the end of the day, if you make a change in yourself, everything around you changes. You're like, you set this ripple out from you as the epicenter, and everything else ripples out. And whatever that is, when I changed from IT and I was working in fitness, for example, people who were friends just disappeared because I was resonating in a different frequency, and they weren't comfortable with what I was doing anymore. And it
It's so
was,
funny you should say that, because I was literally, I told you I was speaking
yeah,
yesterday for a company, and I said exactly the same thing. That whatever you do affects everyone, not just the people around you, but
yeah,
every single person, every single
yeah.
being in the universe, even.
Yes, yeah, absolutely does. And that's quite a profound thing to think about when you really sit down with that.
Yeah.
How can it not be the case? I feel. How can it not change? Because we could jump into quantum physics here, but I'm not going to, because it's a whole new realm. But if you start looking at that, the whole quantum soup of things. They argue that if I'm talking to you right now, but once we finish the conversation, you don't exist. It kind of you just meld back into the quantum soup. Or like if you're looking, I'm looking at the screen right now, yeah, I can see my background. But if I look over there, all of a sudden just this doesn't exist anymore because there's no awareness.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I studied physics for astronomy at university, and for me at that time, it was just mathematics, and I remember thinking, like, studying the wave particle duality experiment and thinking, wow, this is crazy, and the fact that you don't actually know if something exists until you actually measure it, which is your awareness.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very fascinating world, and you start to realize through quantum mechanics that everything is actually all one. It's all a waveform ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think the work that we do, letting go, sort of brings that out into direct experience.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and at a very profound level.
Yeah, if you look at things that you've done yourself, for example, when you work on yourself, or clients that you've worked with, you see the shifts in how they just, I've worked with people who've completely changed their lives. They just have this complete awareness. Oh, why am I here? Why? Like, I was working with someone recently who, to quote himself, he said, I just felt myself unraveling because he'd created an identity about what he thought he wanted. And then he realized that's not what he wanted. So all of a sudden he felt really scared, I suppose you could say, fearful, because well, who the hell am I? It was like, he felt like he was unraveling. He said he was at work because he buys and sells properties. And he said that he's just stood in this room of this property he was thinking about buying for an hour, and he couldn't even remember anything about it. And then he drove away. And I think he created road rage. I think he cut somebody up. He was just completely spaced out. And even when he pulled over, this guy was shouting at him. He's just nothing mattered. He says it was quite unnerving because I really realized that that's not who I am. So who am I? And I think that was really a thing. And so, which was obviously a great thing, because then you can start clearing more belief systems or emotions and emotional splinters to then see where you're really here. So it was, it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. And once you really understand what letting go is, it just blows your mind. Yeah. Because firstly, there's the intellectual understanding, like we were saying. But when you experience it, and also there's a huge shifts happen around you and within your body, it just blows your mind. You realize that it's probably the most powerful thing you can do.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree. 100%. 100%. And of course, your ego intellectually tries to rationalize it. It tries to make sense of it. It tries to look for the why. It tries to justify it some way. But ultimately, it's irrelevant.
And you have to let go of the why, don't you?
Yeah, you do. You've got to let go of it. So it doesn't matter why.
Let go of the need to know.
Yeah.
So okay, so I was gonna say I'm gonna test you, but it's not really gonna be a test. But I'm gonna give you I'm gonna ask you certain things. Yeah. So what could you let go of? What are the type of things that people can let go of? And I'm talking about emotions, thoughts, belief systems, anything. Give me some examples.
For example, okay, so belief systems, because they're there to protect you in some way.
Okay.
If you then remove the underlying reason why they were created in the first place, they no longer hold any value.
So give me an example of a belief system.
Okay, so perfect one. My son, from when he was a toddler, the next door neighbor's dog came over and knocked him on his bum. It was a dog that came over, really loving dog, went to lick his face, knocked him on his bum, and he cried. From that point on, Sam was terrified of dogs. So he wouldn't go anywhere. So he built a belief system of, I don't like the beach. I don't like the river. wasn't that he didn't like the beach or the river, it was the fact that he thought dogs were there off the lead and they were going to bite him and hurt him. And so that belief system was strong. I mean, it was that strong even up to when he was 13. If I managed to get him to go to the beach and a dog came up to him, even if it was just curious, he would jump on my back and scream.
Yeah.
And that's an extreme example. But by being able to take him to that place and just allow him to feel those sensations and let those go, he realized there was nothing to do with the beach at all. In fact, he didn't even know why, because he couldn't remember as a toddler. I knew why. But for him doing that, he just let that go. And all of a sudden, he loved the beach again. He loved going down by the river. And that's just one example where something happens. I think there was another one. It's gone. It'll come back to me. But it can be subtle shifts. It could be the fact that you have guilt or shame around certain scenarios when you're I've got another one. You feel safe with your friends, and then they change. They want to do something different, and because they want to do something different, you feel exposed. You feel
so it's a belief that could be something, I'm not safe.
Yes, I think fundamentally it's I'm not safe in this scenario, so I will create a story, i.e. I'll not go to the beach, so I'll be still. I don't like the beach, but you don't.
Yeah, and often these are hidden, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't see the real reason why, and you don't need to know why. It's like when, this is why I think this is more like powerful. It's not about going to understand why and reliving the event over and over, because unless you clear the energy around that or the trauma around that, you'll still just be reliving it as if it's just already happening. But if you can then have a reaction as a result of that, not knowing why that was there, and then going forwards, you can sit with the sensations that created and let it go. And then all of a sudden, that was never a thing at all. I had an experience again that I felt unsafe, because when I was in my teens, I'd had a skirmish with somebody at school, and that made me feel like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't enough, and it was because he'd said something. I wasn't a fighter at the time, still not really, even though I do martial arts. But so I hit him, and he cried. But because he was the popular lad at school, other people had seen that, because it was home time and everyone was coming out of school. And all of a sudden, this huge crowd appeared behind me, egging him on to have a fight, and I didn't want to fight. So they followed me halfway home, this huge crowd through the streets. And I think it's huge. It was probably about 20 people, but it felt huge at the time. It felt like it was the whole school. And that was like, I just buried that. It was, and I held onto shame of that for the longest time. I didn't even know. It wasn't until I was speaking to another coach who does exactly what we do. In fact, he taught me what I know. He was telling me about an experience he had at Butlins about shame, not being able to join in. He wasn't involved in something, and it was dismissed. And as soon as he's told me that, my mind went straight to there. It doesn't always do that, but I had a similar reaction to his story, and then I allowed it to take me to that place, and then I just cleared that out.
Yeah, and shame is one of those emotions that is very low vibrationally. It's it causes people to kill.
It does, yeah. It's a big driver of suicide. Like I am a deep shame that I can't share. I am a burden. So the world's better off without me. It's an awful thing. It can be a very potent thing and really drag people down into the depths.
So with regards to shame, can you think of ways people would perhaps avoid in a sense of unworthiness or shame in their lives? I'm trying to think if there's how do you think they would avoid it?
I think recognizing the difference. Brené Brown said something great about guilt and shame and the difference. Where guilt is, I have failed, is guilt because something didn't work. But I am a failure is shame, where you make it personal. So it's about understanding where you're making it personal, and attaching it to your own identity, as opposed to something that's just happened, that you've done, but you know, there's a difference between
The
I
guilt
feel.
is more to do with doing, isn't it?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's
And shame more to do with being.
being,
Yeah. Or a false sense of being.
yeah, exactly. It is a false sense of being, but it's something that if we believe in and we don't have the tools to, you know, or the help, I suppose you could say, to guide you out of that, it can be a very lonely place. And of course, shame loves loneliness. That's the whole point. It wants you to be alone. It wants you to feel alone. It wants to be there. So you know, with no other involvement.
Yeah, yeah. It's and to recognize it is so powerful. You know, I
Yeah,
carried a lot of shame for a long period of time, and there's still stuff there that I need to process, and
absolutely. Yeah.
you know, but it affects every aspect of your life, everything. Yeah,
It does, yeah, definitely skews your worldview on things. You know, you won't do certain things because of that shame, and it'll hold. You know, it can easily hold you back and prevent you from living a thriving life, I suppose
yeah,
you could
yeah,
say.
yeah. And you know, everyone to some degree carries shame,
Yeah,
unless you're some
absolutely.
advanced being like Buddha or the,
Yeah, but again, it's all those layers that we said. You know, you know, the younger you are, knowing this stuff and the tools, you know, it prevents years of building up these layers of protection. You know, this happens, right? I'm not going to
yeah,
show my
yeah,
emotions there. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. Hold it all in. So it takes longer. Like as you said before, this, you know, I've still got shame around things. It's probably stuff I'm not aware of at the moment because I'm stripping the layers back. I'm just dealing with what presents itself now. But
yeah.
of course, I've been on this earth for 51 years, so I'm going to have a lot of emotional splinters, a lot of things to address, and all I can do now is, you know, deal with what presents.
And sometimes these layers of shame will come up with some people, but not others. Like for example, one of the things that I noticed about myself recently is I got divorced. So there's some shame involved in telling married people
Yeah,
that I'm divorced,
yeah,
but I don't have that when I speak to divorced people.
yes,
So,
yeah.
so
There's that
married
judgment
people
again.
are, yeah, married
Yeah,
people are effectively helping me clear, you know, my sense of
yeah,
shame related to that,
yeah,
because you know it's a feeling of maybe unworthiness that comes from, you know, getting a divorce, and you know that again that's maybe perhaps happened through the societal conditioning.
absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and
I
in
think
other cultures though, in other countries, it will be far worse so.
yes, yeah, exactly. There'll be some, you know, with to do with religious beliefs, or you know, it'll be like, you know, the worst possible thing you could ever do, and because that's indoctrinated, that's inherent, that's the things that happen because of these cultural beliefs that
Mm,
exist.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
we could talk about this for hours, couldn't we?
Yeah, we could.
But listen, we're going to come to a close now. What
Okay.
are your final thoughts on anyone beginning the path of letting go?
It's all about courage. I think having the courage to admit that there's something not wrong, but something that doesn't serve you. I'm very careful to choose words because it's not, you know, right or wrong is just, you know, what we label. But if things aren't serving you, it's having the courage to admit that there's something that's not working, and being able to find somebody who can create space. Maybe it's just a loved one, maybe it's just a friend, maybe it's just somebody that will just sit there and listen and allow you to express, because sometimes that's the first thing, is just to be able to speak it, because we create huge scary monsters and scenarios in our minds and we don't allow them out. Sometimes when we actually say things out loud, we can see the absurdity of it, and we can see, you know, that it's not, might not be true, by sharing it with somebody else, or this person might just challenge you from a place of love, obviously, to say,
Yeah,
why would that happen? And it gets you to start thinking things differently. And if you can have an awareness of things might be able to be different, then what else, you know, we can look at, and understanding that, I always say the ego's bad master but a good servant. But how often do we allow ourselves just to be controlled by our thoughts? We are not our thoughts. We have thousands per day, and yet how often do we just blindly accept and believe them? But what if we didn't? What
yeah,
if we thought something else, thought maybe, what if they're not true? And then bring awareness down into the body, which is, I think that's the fundamental thing. Having awareness that we've got intuition, we've got things going on in the body, and we don't allow these thoughts to label what's going on, but allow ourselves to feel. Because remember, our thoughts have a language, like, you know, like we speak. Feelings are the language of the body. If we can bring an awareness to that language of our body, those sensations that we have, maybe, just maybe, we can see things from a different point of view.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. And thank you so much for sharing that and on coming on board and being my guest.
No problem at all. I'm honored to be on your course. One thing I would like to say, while I've just remembered, is I wrote this book called Thrive. See, I've just done a shameless plug there, Daniel.
That's completely unexpected and welcome.
Yeah. But this, I mean, the whole point of health for me, Thrive's all about health. It's a holistic approach to high performance living. That's just to help you perform your best. But I'll look at the 4 elements: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. And I talk about the emotional stuff in the book. Obviously, it's not a whole course about doing this, but I wrote the book just to bring an awareness of what's possible, which is what.
Where can people buy your book?
It's on Amazon. To search for Thrive by Dean Colson, and it's on there. But again, it's all about, this whole book is all about, am I safe? We mentioned that earlier in the podcast, which is what reminded us about the book. It's just like, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, and, you know, am I safe, and what you can do about it.
And how can people reach you?
You can get me on social media, LinkedIn, and Dean Colson on LinkedIn, and on Facebook and Instagram as well. Yeah, so that's where I am.
Dean, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much. And, you know, I'd love to have you back at some point. So, and
I'd love to be back.
We'll have to decide what we're going to do, though. You know,
yes,
maybe we'll do some sort of session. Who knows? But yeah.
Yeah, let's do something like that. That'll be really cool.
Then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it. Take care.
Everyone else. So thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you on the next podcast.